Freddy vs. Jason, a 2003 American slasher film directed by Ronny Yu and written by Damian, Shannon and Mark Swift. It's a crossover between the Nightmare on Elm Street and Friday the 13th series, being the 8th installment in the former and the 11th in the latter. The ultimate horror showdown movie where Freddy is back to terrorize the kids of Elm Street. But this time he needs a little bit of help, where he ends up bringing back Jason Voorhees back from the dead to help him. But when Jason starts getting greedy over the killings, we are introduced to the mother of all showdowns. Now what I love about this movie is how they bring back some awesome nightmare scenes with Freddy, and how they make Jason into a brutal killing machine, paying fantastic homage to both movies. So get yourselves comfy and let's take a look at 10 moments from Freddy vs. Jason. Number 10. Freddy's opening scene. The movie begins with Freddy telling us a story where we get a few awesome flashbacks. There is a scene when we see Freddy putting a doll into a fire pit, followed by Freddy sharpening one of the knives of his glove. We then see a little girl in the boiler room scared for her life. We then see Freddy's shadow up against the wall and the camera pans away to the doll in the fireplace while we listen to the little girl screaming. We then see Freddy with a book of all his victims before the parents of Springwood throw some petrol bombs into the building and burn him alive. Freddy then lets us know that after he was burnt alive, he became something much worse. The stuff nightmares are made of. This is where we get some awesome flashbacks to all the previous Freddy movies and Freddy kills. However, Freddy has lost his dream power due to not being able to spread the fear into the children of Springwood for so long, so he brings back Jason Voorhees from the dead, where Jason will be able to kill some of the kids in the real world in order to bring back that fear and Freddy's power. Number 9. Trey's death scene. A painful death scene now in our next spot, and characters Laurie, Kia and Gibb are all together at Laurie's house having a gathering, until Gibb's boyfriend Trey arrives with his friend Blake. Gibb and Trey head upstairs for some alone time and a power cut hits the house. When they finish with their sexy time, Gibb goes off to take a shower and Trey is left alone in his bed. He turns over to grab himself some beer, and when he turns back, Jason is standing at the side of the bed looking menacing. Jason then gets his machete and slams it straight through Trey's back over and over again through the bed. Once Jason has finished, he then pulls either side of the bed and lifts it up, bending and snapping Trey's body backwards and killing him. Gibb then comes out of the shower and finds her dead boyfriend, and it's a brilliant scene. Brutal, but brilliant. Number 8. His name is Freddy Krueger. After Trey's murder, Laurie and the girls are taken to the police station. This is where we hear some of the cops whispering about Freddy Krueger, but they don't want to say his name out loud. Laurie overhears one of these whispers and tries to get some info from Deputy Stubbs, but he has only just moved to Springwood himself and he doesn't really know much about the history. So Laurie is left on her own to ponder the name that she heard, and then it comes back to her, Freddy. Next minute, Laurie is alone in the police station and in a dream. She wanders around looking for someone. There's a really cool scene where Laurie walks down a corridor and past a poster of missing kids, and as she walks past it, all the kids' faces follow her. Laurie then finds a little girl sitting on the floor, and when the little girl turns around, she has no eyes. The little girl then tells Laurie that his name is Freddy Krueger, and soon he will be back when he is strong enough. Laurie starts to freak out, but before you know it, she ends up at the classic Freddy house, where she sees some kids singing the famous Freddy nursery rhyme while skipping. Laurie walks slowly towards them until Freddy pops out and scares her, which ends up waking her up from the nightmare. It's a great scene, and I love how they took Laurie back to a scene that resembled a very similar scene from A Nightmare on Elm Street Part 3. Number 7, GIBB'S death scene. Another great nightmare death scene now, which kickstarts the feud between Freddy and Jason. All of the youngsters in Springwood are having a massive rave in a field, which looks pretty awesome. This is my kind of party. Gibb ends up wandering off into the long grass, where she ends up seeing her dead boyfriend Trey, telling her to follow him. So she ends up following his voice to a derelict building, which turns out to be Freddy's boiler room. And while she's having this dream, we cut to Gibb passed out on the floor, and some creepy dude decides to try and date rape her. Back in the dream, and it's not long before she comes face to face with Freddy, where she ends up running through the boiler room, which totally reminds me of that scene in A Nightmare on Elm Street 1 of Nancy having that nightmare from Nightmare 1. Gibb ends up falling over a balcony and falling onto a load of lockers. She then climbs into one of the lockers to try and hide from Freddy, but Freddy arrives and rips the door open, and before he gets a chance to kill her, Jason kills her in the real world at the party, meaning that Freddy just missed his chance, which really pisses him off. Number 6, Party Field Massacre. Jumping straight off from our last spot, and Jason has just killed Gibb and the creepy guy in the fields. We then cut to two lads smoking some pots, not realizing that Jason is standing behind them. When they turn around, they think it's just one of the party goers dressed up. That is, until when Jason completely spins one of the guys' heads around and breaking his neck. The other guy then sets Jason on fire, thinking that will do the trick, but of course, this is Jason Voorhees. So Jason ends up chasing this guy through the long grass while he's on fire, and it's such an amazing scene. Jason then arrives at the party right in the middle of it all, where he ends up butchering everyone in sight. It's literally a bloodbath, and I just love how Jason is unstoppable during this scene with some amazing kills. Number 5, Showdown with Daddy. A really great, intense scene now with Laurie's dad, which doesn't feature any kills or Freddy or Jason. So after the party massacre, boyfriend Will drives Laurie back to her dad's. But in the car, he tells her that a while ago, he climbed to her bedroom window to come and see her, and when he looked in, he saw Laurie's dad with a knife who ended up killing her mother. Next minute, Laurie's dad bangs on the car window and drags her out of the car, telling her to keep away from Will. Will then stands up to Laurie's dad, and Laurie's dad ends up choking him up against the car, and Laurie, she's screaming and she ends up running back into the house. But Laurie's dad isn't far behind, where they end up having an intense scene together. Laurie demands to know what happens with her mum. She also wants to see a death certificate, and she also wants to know why he's been lying to her about where he's been working. Things get extremely heated, and then Laurie runs into her bedroom and then out of her window to escape her dad. Now, we don't actually know at this stage in the movie whether if Laurie's dad is a bad guy or not, but of course we do find out much later on in the movie that it wasn't Laurie's dad who killed her mum, but it was Freddy, disguised as her dad. Number 4, Mark's death scene. Will's friend Mark from the psychiatric hospital meets a grisly end now in our next spot. Mark is alone and looking at some family photos, specifically his brother who he sadly lost. All of a sudden, Mark hears some noise and sees some steam coming from the bathroom, and he goes to investigate. He goes in, but it's empty. He then goes to the cabinet to get some stay awake pills, but as he closes the mirror, Freddy pops up and disappears, scaring Mark, who ends up dropping his last pill down the sink. He then turns around and sees his dead brother in the bath filled with blood, where he ends up accusing Mark of forgetting about him. All of a sudden, Mark's feet ends up getting grabbed and stuck to the floor by some weird bloody wires. Freddy then becomes Mark's brother, telling Mark that he wants him to deliver a message to the kids of Springwood, but Mark refuses to do so. Will and Laurie arrive outside at Mark's window and they're trying to wake him up, but all of a sudden Mark's back goes up in flames and he starts being thrown around the room. Next minute, Freddy's claw marks appear on Mark's face and Mark is killed, with Freddy leaving a burnt message on his back saying, "Freddy's back." Number 3, Freddy decides to take on Jason. This is the moment where Freddy has had enough of Jason killing all of his victims. As Freddy says, he only wanted Jason to kill a few people, so the time has now come for the battle to commence. When everyone is at the hospital trying to get their hands on that experimental drug called Hypnosil, character Bill has his body taken over by some sort of weird Freddy insect that climbs into his mouth and takes over his body. Freddy then uses Bill's body to destroy all the Hypnosil. Jason arrives on the scene and kills Deputy Stubbs, and everyone makes a run for it. As they run down the corridor, they see Bill just standing there in the hallway, and Will tells him to come with them, but then Bill turns around and says, "I got this," in a Freddy voice. Jason then walks down towards Bill, and Bill then injects a load of Hypnosil into Jason, forcing him to go to sleep, but before Jason goes down, he whips up his machete and slices Bill's body completely in half. Number 2, Jason's nightmare. So Jason has had a load of Hypnosil injected into him, and the guys have a plan for Laurie to go into the dream world to bring Freddy out so Jason can fight Freddy fair and square. So they end up tying Jason up and they stick him in the back of the van, and Laurie lays down next to him and falls asleep. As Laurie falls into the dream, she ends up at Crystal Camp, where she sees a very young Jason being bullied by a load of the other children. It's quite a horrific and disturbing scene to watch, especially when you're watching these kids push him around and shove a bag on his head. I mean, give me blood and guts any day, but when I see a kid being bullied in this sort of way, it kind of gets to me. Laurie then runs over to the staff to try and get help, but the staff are too busy having sex up against the wall. Jason is then thrown into the water where Laurie tries to save him, but then Freddy appears in the water and pulls Jason down. Back in the van, and Jason starts foaming water out of his mouth, but Jason manages to wake up just in time to cause some more havoc. Once again, it's a really good callback scene for all the Friday the 13th fans. Before we get to number 1, please don't forget to hit that subscribe button. We currently upload new videos every week and we are really looking to grow this channel, so make sure to hit that notification bell as well. Number 1, the final battle. Freddy and Jason go through one hell of an epic battle. One minute they're in Freddy's boiler room, next minute they're at Crystal Camp. But Laurie manages to pull Freddy out of the dream eventually, and this is when the final epic begins. Freddy and Jason end up in a brutal fight, and at one point Jason ends up punching his fist into Freddy's body, and even ends up ripping Freddy's arm off. It looks really painful. Freddy then uses Jason's own machete to stab him, before an explosion in the cabin goes off, sending both Freddy and Jason into the lake. Just when Laurie and Will think it's all over, Freddy comes back out of the water one final time, using the only arm that he has left and holding Jason's machete. Freddy goes to kill Will and Laurie until Jason ends up stabbing Freddy with Freddy's other arm with the claw going right through Freddy's body, where Freddy ends up falling to his knees. Laurie then picks up the machete, she looks at Freddy and says, "Welcome to my world, bitch," before proceeding to chop off Freddy's head, and Freddy's head goes flying into the lake. It's a great moment and it's a brilliant death scene that we've never seen in previous Freddy movies. I like how the makers thought outside of the box with this one and didn't make the film predictable. It's a brilliant ending to a brilliant movie. And that was 10 moments from the movie Freddy vs Jason. So, do we have any fans here? If we do, then let me know in the comments box below, because I am a huge fan of this film too. Okay guys, well thank you all for watching. Make sure you smash that subscribe button, stay safe, and I'll see you all again very soon.